It was July 4, 2013, Independence Day, and excitement filled the air as vibrant parade floats moved through Oregon. Among those eager to watch the festivities was Stephanie Ann Warner, a 43-year-old woman who decided to join in the celebrations. Stephanie, who resided in the quiet Rut community, planned to attend the parade with her boyfriend, Lenny Ames. Having previously lived in New Orleans, Louisiana, where she ran a restaurant called Magnolia Grill, Stephanie was well known for her vibrant personality and community involvement. At the time of her disappearance, she was volunteering with the Jackson County Fuel Committee, an organization committed to providing heating fuel to low-income families. Her participation in the parade was tied to this role, as she was seen walking alongside the Jackson County Fuel Committee's float. After the parade ended, Stephanie and Ames left the event and returned to Rut. Later that day, Stephanie was seen again at Stewart Market, a local convenience store, around 5 p.m. After dropping Ames off at the Rut Country store, the two parted ways. Tragically, this would be the last time anyone saw or heard from Stephanie. A few days passed with no contact from Stephanie, and her mother, growing increasingly concerned, filed a missing person report with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. The investigation revealed unsettling details. Stephanie's home in the Rut community appeared untouched, with all her personal belongings left behind. Even her beloved pets were found unattended. Her dark green 2004 Nissan Xterra SUV was discovered parked in her driveway along Highway 238. There were no signs of forced entry or foul play at her residence, leaving investigators with little to work on. Attention quickly turned to Lenny Ames, the last known person to see Stephanie. Ames lived in a campsite on a nearby mountain and told investigators that after being dropped off at the Rut Country store, he paid a group of young men to drive him back to his campsite. According to his account, he visited Stephanie's home the next day, but found no sign of her. Curiously, he borrowed her vehicle to run errands at the Williams store, also located on Highway 238, before returning it to her driveway and heading back to his campsite. Ames remained at the campsite for several days afterward. For 2 years, the case went cold, with no significant leads or developments. Then, on July 8, 2015, Ames was officially named the prime suspect. Authorities believed that Stephanie never left the area and suspected foul play. However, Ames ceased cooperating with the investigation and eventually left the state, deepening the mystery surrounding Stephanie's disappearance. In 2023, the case took a startling turn when a local mushroom hunter stumbled upon human remains, hair, and what appeared to be tissue in a natural area roughly 2.5 miles from Stephanie's home. Law enforcement confirmed that the remains were human, but were unable to determine if they belonged to Stephanie. The discovery prompted renewed efforts to search the area. Search and rescue teams, along with cadaver dogs, scoured the region for additional evidence, but their efforts yielded no further discoveries. As part of the reopened investigation, authorities reviewed every piece of evidence, re-examined case files, and re-interviewed those connected to Stephanie. Despite these efforts, her whereabouts remain unknown. Stephanie Ann Warner is remembered as a compassionate woman with distinctive tattoos, including a tree branch, an owl on her ankle and foot, a colorful bird and flowers on her thigh, a woman's head, and a mermaid on her chest. If you have any information about Stephanie Ann Warner or her disappearance, please contact the Jackson County Sheriff's Office at 541-774-6800. Every detail, no matter how small, could help bring closure to this enduring mystery. Rita Sloff Monteiro was last seen on CCTV from a bus on February 17, 2006. She was 18 years old and trying to get to a study visit with her friends, but had missed the bus. She never arrived at her intended destination but didn't return home either. What happened to her remains a mystery. Rita was a popular and outgoing young woman, but she'd been struggling to maintain her friendships over the past couple of years. In 2004, she'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia, which made her withdraw a little and caused her to suffer from bouts of depression. She would sometimes skip classes and drop out of meetings with friends. Despite her problems, she was looking forward to attending art classes after graduating. She had always enjoyed drawing and painting and wanted to continue this into adulthood. Given her plans, the study trip to a museum would have been extremely interesting to her. The location is home to a contemporary art museum and is the second most visited museum in Portugal. Rita had arranged to take part in the study trip with a group of friends. The plan had been to meet at a market where they would take a bus to the museum. Rita's mother dropped her off at 9 a.m., but her friends had not yet arrived. Rita waited for them for a while before going to a cafe that was directly opposite the bus stop. She used the bathroom and then called her friends to ask when they would be arriving. They said they were on their way and would be there soon. According to staff at the cafe, Rita left immediately after this. But when her friends arrived at the bus stop a few minutes later, she was nowhere to be seen. At about 9:15 a.m., the bus arrived. It wasn't unusual for Rita to change her mind about plans, and her friends believed that was exactly what had happened here. They boarded the bus and went on the study trip. By about 9:25 a.m., Rita was at the bus stop. CCTV from a passing bus caught an image of Rita talking to an unidentified woman. It's believed she was asking about bus times or if there was another way to get to her destination. It would have been about an hour's walk, and it appeared that the next bus to that destination wouldn't be for a while. There was also a young man at the bus stop at the time, and he was pacing back and forth. A few minutes later, another bus came. Rita got on the bus and asked the driver if it was going to the museum. It wasn't, so she got off the bus, and this was the last time anybody saw Rita. When she didn't return home that evening, her mother began to worry. It was even more worrying when she found out that Rita had never arrived at the museum, and none of her friends knew where she was. Rita's family tried to report her missing, but ran into problems due to how short a time she'd been missing. When her father asked the police to try to trace her phone, he was told they would need a court order, and the courts were closed at that point. Rita was legally an adult, but her mental health condition meant she was considered vulnerable. This didn't add to the urgency in the case from police, though. When Rita's phone was eventually traced, the police discovered that it had been on until 4 p.m. on February 19th, more than 48 hours after she was last seen. It connected to multiple different cell towers, indicating that Rita, or at least her phone, had traveled a lot over those 2 days. The last place it pinged was about 7 miles north of where she had gone missing. After that, it was turned off before the battery ran out. By this point, Rita's family was very concerned. She had nothing with her other than her phone and her debit card, which was not used until after she went missing. She didn't have the medication that she needed to take daily, which only meant that she was even more vulnerable. Despite this, there still wasn't much urgency from the police. Rita's family hired a private investigator, but that didn't result in any new leads. Years later, Rita's father would win a lawsuit against local authorities due to their handling of the case. That didn't undo the damage caused by the delay in the investigation, though. Theories in this case range from Rita having a mental health crisis and ending up in the water, meeting foul play, or possibly even running away. There's one theory that she traveled to the Netherlands, where her maternal grandparents lived, but there's no evidence for this. Rita is described as 152 centimeters tall, with brown hair and brown eyes. She also had a lip piercing. Anyone with information in this case can contact 225,582,000. On the morning of June 25, 2024, ZYANYA Valore's parents realized she wasn't at home. A search of the local area turned up no clues, and they reported her as a missing person. 6 months on, there's still no sign of her. ZYANYA is considered an at-risk individual. She was 21 years old at the time of her disappearance, living with her parents in California. When she was a teenager, ZYANYA was diagnosed with autism. She and her parents spent the next few years trying to figure out the best way for her to live with her condition. Unfortunately, ZYANYA had become more isolated, refusing to leave the house and not looking after herself. Her parents tried to encourage her to go out and join her father on walks with the dog. ZYANYA joined him a few times, but it wasn't something she enjoyed. She preferred to sleep in and stay up until the early hours of the morning. When her parents woke up on the day of her disappearance, they assumed she was still in bed and went about their day as usual. Around 11 a.m., they returned home from a shopping trip. ZYANYA's mother was looking for a place to put an air conditioner unit when she noticed ZYANYA's bedroom window was open and the window screen was missing. She went to check on her daughter, only to find there was nobody in the bedroom. She realized ZYANYA hadn't been there that morning and had vanished in the night. A quick search of the area didn't reveal anything, and by noon, ZYANYA was reported missing. As she has autism, the search for ZYANYA began immediately. This wasn't the first time she had gone missing. In 2020, ZYANYA left the house and was found a few hours later at a local church. This wasn't somewhere she had visited before, and why she chose to go there was a mystery. ZYANYA's family were hopeful that something similar had happened this time. But not only was ZYANYA not at the church, nobody in the local community had spotted her. During her earlier disappearance, many neighbors had seen her walking out and helped her parents bring her home. This time, there were no sightings. She hadn't even appeared on doorbell or CCTV cameras. ZYANYA had her phone with her when she vanished without a trace. The phone didn't have a SIM card and only worked when connected to Wi-Fi. It was also connected to her laptop, which investigators used to try to trace the phone. They found that it had connected to an open Wi-Fi network at a nearby Airbnb in the early hours of the morning. Sniffer dogs were brought in to try to trace ZYANYA and followed her scent along a path that passed near the same Airbnb, suggesting she had walked down this route when she disappeared. But the scent suddenly stopped along a cycle path. Her father noticed that the trail followed the same route he and ZYANYA had walked on during one of the few occasions he managed to get her out of the house. It's possible she chose that route due to its familiarity, but it may just be a coincidence. It's believed ZYANYA left her room via her bedroom window at around 2 a.m. It would have been difficult for her to do so alone due to her short height, but no unknown fingerprints were found in her bedroom. It seems that she left the house willingly. She was wearing just a tank top and shorts, and wasn't wearing shoes. Despite extensive searches, no trace of ZYANYA has been found. She's described as being 5 feet tall, 90 pounds, with black hair, brown eyes, and a mole under her nose. Anybody with information regarding this case can contact the Ventura County Sheriff's Office at 805-654-951. Nikki Chang Saley McCain was last seen in May 2024, after visiting her brother-in-law in the hospital. She vanished without a trace, and her sisters began a campaign to find out what happened to her. Nikki was 41 years old at the time of her disappearance. Her sisters described her as very outgoing and funny, the kind of person they would turn to when in need. She had been married to her husband for 16 years, and they had 4 children together. However, the relationship wasn't a good one. There had allegedly been many fights, including one in December 2023, that left Nikki in the hospital. NIKKI had reportedly told one of her sisters that she was planning to get a divorce, but she was always worried about being the one to break up the family. Even with the problems in her relationship, NIKKI apparently remained involved with her in-laws. In May 2024, her brother-in-law was admitted to the hospital after an emergency. Many family members went to visit him. During this time, there was a lot of vehicle sharing and swapping as different people traveled in different cars. On May 17th, NIKKI sent a text message in a group chat with her sisters, letting them know that she was visiting her brother-in-law in the hospital. The last text they received from her was at 12:38 a.m. the following morning. She mentioned that she planned to drive her mother-in-law's truck back to her home in the Reading Rancheria area. From there, one of her husband's friends was supposed to give her a lift back to her own home. A little while later, one of NIKKI's sisters sent another message to the group chat, but NIKKI didn't respond. According to her sisters, this wasn't too unusual. They would often go a few days without hearing from her. It was only a few days later when NIKKI's husband contacted her sisters, saying he thought she was missing, that they realized something was wrong. NIKKI had left her husband for brief periods of time in the past, usually going to stay with one of her sisters. But this time, nobody had seen or heard from her. Her sisters immediately contacted the police to report her missing. It's unclear where NIKKI was last seen. Her own vehicle, a 2002 pearl-colored Chevy Avalanche, was found on May 25th, abandoned in a remote location in TYARRA County, about an hour's drive from the Reading Rancheria area. What this means remains a mystery. According to her last text messages, NIKKI wasn't with her car at the time of her disappearance. The fact that she was getting a ride back to her home suggests that her car wasn't at her mother-in-law's house either. Police have revealed very little information, as this is an active and ongoing investigation. NIKKI is described as being 5 feet tall, weighing 110 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. Reading Rancheria, Shasta County Secret Witness, and Kingsman Philanthropic Corp are each offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to NIKKI's location. Anyone with information can contact the Shasta County Major Crimes Unit at 530-245-6135. What should have been an exciting time for the young woman turned into 7 years of mystery for her family, who are still looking for answers. TYARRA Williams was a 19-year-old woman living in Greensboro, North Carolina. She was enrolled in Guilford Technical Community College for a course on childhood development and wanted to spend her life helping young children get the best start in life. At the time of her disappearance, she was living with her grandmother at the Stony Brook Apartments, as she didn't believe her grandmother should be living alone. However, she still spent plenty of time with her mother, who lived in the same apartment complex. On January 7th, the day of her disappearance, she had been to college to make sure everything was in order before her course began. She then spent time with her mother, helping her take down Christmas decorations, before her younger brother and her boyfriend, Aaron, arrived at 8 p.m. Aaron, TYARRA, and her younger brother went to TYARRA's grandmother's home for dinner. However, half an hour later, TYARRA left the apartment again. She said she was going to meet a friend named Travis, who lived in the same apartment complex. It wasn't a name any of TYARRA's loved ones knew, but they trusted her judgment. She was supposed to be home in an hour, but TYARRA never returned. Aaron tried calling TYARRA that night when she didn't come back, but his calls went straight to voicemail. The next day, he discovered she hadn't returned to her home that night at all. TYARRA's mother and grandmother also couldn't get through to her phone. The GPS on her phone showed that it was still in or near the apartment complex when it had been switched off the night before. TYARRA's mother, Danielle, began to believe Travis may not have existed. She discovered that her daughter had been out with one of her ex-boyfriends, and she believed that was who TYARRA had been with the night she vanished. It was a hunch that would turn out to be true. The ex-boyfriend hasn't been named, but the police spoke with him after TYARRA was reported missing. At first, he denied speaking with her, but eventually confessed. He said that they had met up the night TYARRA vanished and spent 20 or 30 minutes in his car talking. He last saw her walking back towards her grandmother's house. Police found no evidence of foul play from this ex-boyfriend, but he remains a person of interest. Over the years, many tips have been called in. Some include locations of a body, while others claim TYARRA is still alive, but being held against her will. None of the tips have turned up any clues about TYARRA's disappearance, and the case remains unsolved. TYARRA was 5 feet 5 inches and weighed 120 pounds when she vanished. She had brown hair and brown eyes, and a nickel-sized burn scar on her right wrist. There's a $10,000 reward for information leading to TYARRA's return. Anyone with information can contact the Greensboro Police Department at 336-373-2222 or Crime Stoppers at 336-373-1000. A night out on a party bus ended with a creepy disappearance for 23-year-old Bryce BORCA. More than 6 months later, the only trace that's been found is a tie that he'd been wearing when he got lost in the woods. Bryce and his friend spent the night of October 29th on a party bus in Eagan, Minnesota. Bryce became heavily intoxicated, and the friends decided to call it a night in the early hours of October 30th. They used the ride-sharing app Lyft to head to the east side of the city. During the drive, Bryce decided to get out of the car while the vehicle was still moving, but his friends managed to keep him under control until they got out. At about 2 a.m., they arrived at Hill Ridge Drive, where one of the friends lived. It was a few miles from Bryce's apartment and would have been a 45-minute walk, but Bryce told his friends he was going to walk home. He headed off while the friends went inside. It was a journey Bryce had done many times before. The route was well lit, and even while heavily intoxicated, it shouldn't have been too difficult. But Bryce made a wrong turn early on and ended up walking for 30 minutes in the wrong direction. At 2:34 a.m., one of Bryce's friends received a FaceTime call from him. He was lost in a wooded area and had only 2% battery life on his phone. He told his friend he had no idea where he was or how to get home. Bryce managed to send a pin to his friend before the battery ran out and the call ended. Bryce's friends immediately set out to try to find him. The pin took them to a wooded area between Highway 13 and the Minnesota River. They found no sign of their friend and contacted the police at around 11 a.m. that morning to report him missing. Over the next 2 days, over 250 people took part in searches for Bryce. The terrain was particularly difficult, with some marshy areas and some more rocky areas. Even for searchers walking while sober in broad daylight, it was a difficult task to navigate the area. There were also no lights, even around a railway line that runs through the area. It would have been pitch black when Bryce was walking. Early on in the search, a tie was found, which the police believed belonged to Bryce. A Nike shoe was also found, but it didn't match the description of what Bryce was wearing when he vanished. Later searches were also hampered by poor weather, with flooding taking place in the area over the winter. It's possible that what clues might have been there have been washed away. The police were able to uncover CCTV footage from an industrial building not far from where Bryce's phone last pinged. It's not been released to the public, but showed him walking alone. In January, a $30,000 reward for information leading to Bryce was announced, but so far, it remains unclaimed. Bryce is described as a white male with blonde hair. He was last seen wearing a white shirt and possibly a cardigan. Anyone with information should contact the Eagan Police Department at 651-675-5827. For the past 11 years, the family of Anthony Stammers has been making appeals for information on his disappearance. When he left his family home in Colchester in 2012, it was as if he vanished into thin air. Since then, there's been little update on this strange missing person case. Anthony was a creative young man who liked writing and playing guitar. He would occasionally write music, and his mother would sit and listen to his new songs. He had previously suffered from depression, but it was a condition that he was managing. In the spring of 2012, Anthony's grandfather, Arthur, passed away. It was a real blow to Anthony, who had been close with his grandfather, and it naturally took another toll on his mental health. According to his family, they were all going through the grief together. Anthony didn't appear to be at a point of crisis and had been making plans for the future. In particular, he planned to move to Bristol to live closer to his older brother. May 27th was the day before Anthony's funeral. Anthony's mother, Julie, was at home when Anthony left the house at 10 a.m. He was going to London to meet some friends, and he would be back the next day. Later that same day, he sent a text to his mother, asking her to make sure his black pants were ready for the funeral the next day. It seemed as if he had every intention of showing up to give the reading that he'd been planning to do. But the next day, there was no sign of Anthony. His parents couldn't get a hold of him, and they immediately knew something was wrong. It turned out that Anthony had never arrived to see his friends the day before, either. The police were contacted, and early on in the investigation, they discovered Anthony used an ATM not far from his home, not long after he left the house. He withdrew £140 from a machine in Colchester. Unfortunately, there were no CCTV cameras at the site, but the police had no reason to believe it wasn't Anthony who had withdrawn the money. His bank account hasn't been touched since. The next few months were spent searching through CCTV footage from Colchester, and ground searches also took place, but no trace of him was ever found. Since then, the case has gone cold. Anthony's brother appeared on TV to raise awareness about the case, and the family has fundraised for the Missing People charity. Anthony was 27 years old when he disappeared. He was 5 feet 10 inches tall, of a medium build, with short, dark brown hair. When he was last seen, he was wearing blue jeans and a blue and red checked shirt, and was carrying a black satchel. He may have been wearing a black New York Yankees baseball cap and a beige jacket. Anyone with information on the case can contact the police on 101 with reference number 12001 for 52, or the Missing People charity at 116,000. Kevin Winters was described as a free-spirited person who had moved to Maui, Hawaii, on a whim 14 years before he vanished without a trace. Nobody knew of anybody who would want to harm him, or any reason why he would want to disappear. But he did just that in September of 2021, and hasn't been seen or heard from since. Kevin was 51 at the time of his disappearance. He grew up in Michigan as one of 4 siblings. When he was a teenager, he had gotten into a dirt bike accident that left him with one leg shorter than the other. In 2007, Kevin left Michigan with just a single bag to visit Maui. His family believed he would only be there for about a month, but Kevin fell in love with the island and decided to stay. He lived a simple life, working at the North Shore hostel in exchange for his room. His mother would also send him money every month or so he could survive. By all accounts, Kevin was someone who got along with everyone. He didn't have a criminal record and didn't use illegal substances. He drank, but didn't have a drinking problem. But at the end of August of 2021, something very out of character happened. He was apparently caught stealing a co-worker's phone that was left out in the communal area. He was fired and given a week to move out. On September 1st, he left the hostel for the final time. The next day, Kevin spoke with his mother, Maxine, on the phone. It was something he did almost every night, and nothing seemed unusual to Maxine. The conversation was short and sweet. According to his mother, it would be the last time she heard from him. A few days passed, and there was no call from Kevin. He didn't respond when Maxine called, and no other family members were able to get in contact with him. According to Kevin's family, they called the Maui Police Department on September 8th, though a report wasn't officially filed until September 19th. After he was reported missing, Kevin's family was able to get a hold of his bank records. It's not clear where he spent the night after leaving the hostel, but his family believed that he spent the night in a storage unit that he rented. The next record of him was at the Maui Brewing Company at about 8:40 p.m. This was about an hour away from Kevin's storage unit, and he would have had to have gotten there on public transit, as he didn't have a working vehicle. At 9:45 p.m., Kevin was spotted on CCTV depositing a check at an ATM at the First Hawaiian Bank near the brewery. His family found this extremely strange. Even though Maxine would send him money regularly, there was apparently no evidence that he deposited the money into his account very often. The next day, he was caught on CCTV at the same ATM, depositing another check. He was wearing the same clothes. This would be the last known trace of Kevin. Nobody in Maui has seen or heard from Kevin since his disappearance, and his family doesn't believe that he would willingly disappear. He also left $1,200 in his bank account and didn't collect his last paycheck. Kevin is described as a white male with brown hair and blue eyes. He was 5 feet 7 inches and weighed 155 pounds when he vanished. His right leg is shorter than his left, and he would normally wear black shoes with lifts to try to ease the pain in his hip that this caused. A $2,000 reward is offered for any information leading to Kevin. Information can be passed on to the Maui County Police Department at 808-244-6400. When people go missing abroad, it can be even harder than usual for families and friends to locate their missing loved ones. Different languages and customs can frustrate the search and the searchers. In the case of Jesse Galganov, it added to the confusion in an already puzzling case. Jesse disappeared while on a hiking trip in Peru in 2017. He was 22 years old at the time and had graduated college a few months earlier. He was described as a bright young man and planned to go to medical school to become a doctor. But before that, he wanted to go on a gap year. Jesse was an experienced traveler and hiker and looked forward to seeing new sights in South America and Asia. The first stop on his gap year was Peru. He arrived in Lima on September 24th and spent a couple of days seeing the sights in the city. He kept in touch with his friends and family back home, especially his mother in Canada. After a few days, Jesse took an 8-hour bus trip to Juarez, further north. The city sits just outside the Huascaran National Park. The Peruvian Andes overlook the city, and it's a popular spot for tourists. Jesse arrived in Juarez on the morning of September 28, 2017, and set about getting to his hostel, Came House. He was captured on CCTV walking towards the hostel and arrived at 6:40 a.m. He spent the day in Juarez, gathering supplies and visiting various supermarkets. He also talked with people at the hostel and his friends back home. The people he met at the hostel said he was excited about his travels and was in good spirits. Jesse spent the day at the hostel, then set out early the following morning for the Santa Cruz Trail. He told his mother it would be about a 4-day hike and he wouldn't have reception during that time. He didn't want her to worry and said he would be back in touch on October 2nd. He would need to be back in civilization by then because he had a return bus ticket for that day. Jesse was on a budget and wouldn't want to waste money on a ticket for a trip he wasn't certain he would take. October 2nd came and went, and Jess's mother didn't hear from him. After a few more days, she got very worried and started to reach out to his friends. They hadn't heard from him either. It didn't seem unbelievable that Jesse might change his plans and take a longer hiking route. But his friends thought it was strange that he would let his mother worry. Jess's mother contacted authorities in Peru, Canada, and the US, as Jesse was a dual citizen, and started the investigation into his disappearance. At first, it wasn't clear if Jesse made it to the trail at all or even to the hostel. The hostel owner first said that he had, but then denied it. In the end, Snapchat messages from the hostel, as well as the CCTV footage, proved he had been there. The trail was harder to prove. According to the park service that administered the trail, there was no one registered on the trail the day Jesse went hiking. He hadn't paid the registration fee at the trailhead, but that didn't necessarily mean that he hadn't gone ahead with the hike. It could have been due to the fact that the people working weren't actual employees and proper protocol might not have been followed. This confusion caused some delay in the investigation as Jess's family considered the possibility that he might have been attacked on his way to the trailhead. A privately hired search team eventually found evidence that Jesse had made it onto the trail. 2 French tourists had seen Jesse on October 1st, the day before. He had arrived at the Torlepampa camp where they were staying late. He told them that he was late because he'd gotten disoriented and was suffering from headaches. It seemed as if he had altitude sickness. The next day, he was again in good spirits and left early after breakfast. The final sighting of Jesse was at 3:30 p.m. on October 1st, when he was asked by a group of Czech hikers for some water near Punta Union Pass. Jesse was definitely on the trail and seemed close to finishing it. It was either on the final day of the trip or on the afternoon of the penultimate day that something went wrong. If Jesse did run into trouble on the trail, his body has never been found. Neither have any of his belongings, which were brightly colored. The trail isn't for novices, but it was well trafficked, and if Jesse were somewhere nearby, it's likely that someone would have found him. It's possible, though, that he got disoriented and might have wandered off the trail and gotten lost in the jungle. Foul play is also a possibility. Some believe Jesse might have been attacked and robbed while on his hike and that his body was purposefully hidden. Jesse is described as being 5 feet 10 inches and weighing 170 pounds. He had brown hair and brown eyes, was wearing black clothing, and carried a hiking pack with a Canadian flag patch on one side. His bag contained a 1-person tent, camping mattress, and other camping essentials. Anyone with information is asked to contact. When students and teachers at Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick, learned that Chris Metallic was a missing person, they all thought he would be found relatively quickly. Now, more than 9 years after he disappeared, there's still no sign of the missing student. Chris was 20 years old in November of 2012. He was 6 feet tall, loved basketball, and was described as the peacemaker of his friendship group. On the night of November 24th, he was at a house party in downtown Sackville. He'd been drinking, like most of the guests, and at about 1:30 a.m., he left the house to head home. He wasn't wearing any shoes, and a friend came across him and guided him back to the house. They gave him a pair of flip-flops to borrow for the journey home. This was the last time anybody that knew Chris would ever see him. The walk home should have taken 20 minutes, but Chris never made it back. The following morning, Chris was reported missing. That's when police realized a strange individual, reported walking on the side of a rural road at 5:30 a.m., matched Chris's description. The person was reported walking along a nearby road by a man on his way to work. The man thought that it was odd that anybody would be walking at that time in the morning. The exact location of the sighting hasn't been found, but police revealed that they were increasing their search to include Route 940 and the junction between those two roads. This was about an hour's walk from the house party. It was also very close to the Tantramar River. A few days after Chris's disappearance, the flip-flops he was wearing were found at the side of the road, along with footsteps later confirmed to be Chris's. The footprints led to the river. A search of the river took place, but no evidence was ever found, and the case remains a strange, unsolved mystery. There are too many unanswered questions related to this case. It's not clear why Chris left the party in the first place, why he didn't bother to get his shoes, and why they weren't given to him when he walked back to the house. Even drunk, Chris should have been able to make his way home. After 4 hours of walking in the cold, it's likely he would have sobered up enough. If he had gotten lost, it's possible he was suffering from hypothermia, which could have caused him to behave strangely. But that still leaves strange mysteries unexplained. At the time of his disappearance, Chris Metallic was described as Aboriginal, 6 feet tall, and weighing about 180 pounds, with dark hair and glasses. Anyone with information that could answer this unsolved case should contact the Sackville RCMP at 506-364-5023. Dustin LEHEN, a 39-year-old man from Houston, Texas, has been missing since October 24, 2023. Originally hailing from Los Angeles, Dustin has a daughter and worked as a job developer, a role for which he relocated to Houston after living in Ohio for some time. He had a good relationship with his mother, who lives in California. On the evening of his disappearance, he spoke to her over the phone, telling her that he was spending time with one of his friends in his apartment on Highland Cross Drive. He told her that he couldn't talk to her just then, but that he would call her back as soon as his friend left. She waited for him to call, but he never did. He has been missing since that night, with no clue as to what happened to him. When he still hadn't contacted his mother the next day, she started to worry, since it was very out of character for him to stay out of touch. She tried to call him several times, but got no answer, causing her even more concern. When he couldn't be located at his apartment, his friend, who had been over at his place the previous evening, also became concerned. He filed a missing person report with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. During the resulting investigation, Dustin's cell phone was pinged and found to have been at an Aldi store at some point. His car was collected as evidence, and his family found a comforter that his mother had gifted to him in a storage container outside the building. A year later, one of Dustin's friends, Devontae Clark, was arrested when he was caught driving a car belonging to Karen Miles, a 61-year-old woman who had been murdered. Devontae was charged with murder in that case and is now considered a suspect in Dustin's case. No further clues have ever been found, and Dustin's case remains open. He is described as having black hair and brown eyes, standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, and weighing 150 pounds. He was last seen wearing blue jeans and a white shirt. Anyone who has information on his case is asked to contact the Harris County Sheriff's Office at 713-221-6000, quoting agency case number 231010176. Dustin's missing person case number is MP114293.